Alrighty, so we are looking at digestive system physiology today. We want to understand how our digestive system, all of its individual pieces, that's its anatomy, and how they function, the physiology, right? So, learning objectives today. We're going to identify all of the organs of the digestive system. That's the anatomic discussion. Explain the processes by which they are actually going to sort of move things around. That's sort of how they start to operate and work. you know, think of your digestive system as, you have like an assembly line if you're trying to build a bunch of cars or something. Well, this is sort of a de-assembly line. In an assembly line, it's like, all right, you put this on and then it moves over here and somebody else puts something else on and it moves over there and somebody else puts something else on and it moves down the line. They keep adding stuff on. Well, this is a de-assembly line, right? Like stuff comes in, we pull pieces out of it, it moves on, pull pieces out of it and keep going. So we're going to talk about how that sort of movement actually operates. Talk about the anatomy of the stomach and what pieces it has there, and then how it actually digests things. Look at how hormones are helping regulate all of that as well. A lot of your hunger is very hormonally related, so we're going to talk about some tips and tricks to regulate those hormones, which is kind of nice. We will then get into our accessory organs. We do want to talk about some of the things that are attached to our digestive tract, even if they're not necessarily directly part of it. You think of your digestive tract as a big long tube, and there's a couple little tubes attached to it that are sort of inserting some certain things. So we're going to get into that. And then we'll talk about the different regions of the large and the small intestine. That's where it's going to get gross. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit on our major nutrients, proteins, fats, carbs, vitamins, minerals, water. So your digestive system. Let's go ahead and we're going to launch off with a video here that's going to kind of break this down for us. Let's see, crash course digestive system. And I don't want the first one, I want that one. All right. Oh Lord. Always starting off with an ad. Oh, I need to make my sound share anyways. All right.
Hi, I hope you don't mind that I'm eating. This is actually just my first course. For my birthday, the writers wrote me a script where I just get to eat the whole time. And I can't think of a better way to demonstrate the workings of the digestive system, the series of hollow organs that we use to break down and process nutrients and energy we need to function. Though, wait a second. If I remember correctly, digestion is actually pretty freaking disgusting, so maybe I shouldn't be eating right now. Whatever. Waiter! The digestive system is so fundamental that it's basically step number one in the guide to how to make an animal. You probably remember that during the embryonic development of most animals, the digestive tract is the very first thing that forms. When the blastula, that little wad of cells that we all used to be, turns into a little wad of cells with a tube running through it, that tube is your digestive system. And pretty much every animal has a digestive system of some kind, but they're not all alike. Far from it. In fact, digestive tracts are specially adapted to animals' feeding behavior and diet. For instance, a housefly eats mostly liquid or very finely granulated food, but before it does that, it's gotta puke its digestive juices all over its lunch and then let them digest it for a while before it sucks it up into its mouth. If we did it like that, first dates would be less common. Most vertebrates put food in one end of the tube and our digestive system processes it, and then it gets rid of the waste out the other end of the tube. No muss, no fuss. Well, actually, there's a little bit of muss at the end, you may have noticed. But the beauty of it is that this whole process is run by our autonomic nervous system, so we don't have to think about it until maybe the very last step when we're in traffic and just had 2 cups of coffee and a bran muffin. Then we have to think about it a little bit. Among vertebrates, the digestive tract might be short or long or have organs that do different things depending on what its feeding habits are. For instance, dogs are mostly carnivores and also scavengers. They mostly eat meat, but sometimes that meat's been dead for a while. So the dog's digestive system has developed to take food in, absorb as many nutrients as possible, and then deposit it on somebody's lawn all in a period of about 6 hours. Dogs have an extremely short digestive tract because if you're in the habit of eating rotten meat, you'd better be able to digest it fast. If you don't, the bad bacteria that's probably living on that armadillo carcass is going to take up residence in your gut and put you in a world of hurt. Cows, on the other hand, take a very, very, very long time to digest their food, around 80 hours, because they have to process plants, mostly grass. Grass has a ton of cellulose in it, and evolution has yet to produce an animal that can manufacture a stomach acid or enzyme tough enough to break down cellulose. So cows have microorganisms in their guts that break down the cellulose for them. This process takes a 4-chambered stomach, each one with a slightly different microecology, and a lot of cud chewing, or regurgitating and rechewing of grass, before it passes all the way through. So nature is full of crazy digestion stories, and I honestly wish that I had time to tell them all. But let's focus on human digestion from now on, mostly because you're probably a human, we don't assume anything here, and you'll be wanting to know how your body does all this stuff. And 2, humans actually have a pretty good all-purpose digestive system. We're omnivores, after all. We eat plants and meat, so our systems are generalized to handle all kinds of stuff. Like most animals, humans have a bunch of different acids and enzymes in our digestive tract that break down food so that it can be absorbed and used by our bodies. But the secret to successful digestion is maximizing surface area, in more than one way, actually. The first way we maximize surface area is on the food itself. So say I take a bite out of this apple. Right now, it's like an apple boulder sitting there in my mouth. I got enzymes in my saliva that immediately start breaking it down, like the outsides of the boulder. As I swallow this chunk whole right now, not only would it hurt like heck, the rest of my digestive system would have a really hard time dealing with it because most of the enzymes and acids would have the same difficulty working all the way through this big solid hunk. But when I use my awesome teeth to chew up this hunk of apple, suddenly there's double, triple, quadruple the surface area on the food. I'm making up apple gravel from the apple boulder. Maybe even apple sand. For humans, chewing is key because breaking down our food into smaller and smaller bits allows enzymes and acids to get at them. And after our teeth have made the pieces small enough, the chemicals break them down further until they're fine enough for our bodies to absorb nutrients from them. But it's not just the surface area of the food that's important. The surface area of the digestive system is key to the whole process as well. Last time I talked about how we have a whole bunch of surface area in our lungs to absorb tons of oxygen all at once. Well, our digestive system works in much the same way. Most of the absorption of nutrients happens in our small intestines, and the length of the average human adult's small intestine is about 7 meters. Plus, inside our small intestines there are a bunch of little folds and little absorbing fibers with absorbing fibers on them, and no, I didn't misspeak, the fibers have fibers. That's how hard our intestines work to increase their surface area. Last episode I was all impressed that lungs have a total surface area of 75 square meters. Well, the small intestine has a surface area of 250 square meters. Ugh, it's kind of gross. I wouldn't want to see it spread out over a tennis court or anything. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Digestion does not start at the small intestine, people. It starts at the mouth. Now, as you can see, this hot pocket is surrounded by some kind of bread, if you can call it that. Bread is a starch which breaks down into glucose. When I start gnawing on a piece of bread, look at the outside here, so it's mostly bread. The glands in my mouth start secreting saliva, which contains salivary amylase, an enzyme designed to break down starch into glucose. The more I chew, the more amylase will get to all the different sides of the bread, and that's why the more you chew bread, the sweeter it tastes. Amylase doesn't really do much to the meat of the cheese in this thing. I've got other enzymes and acids that are gonna work on them later on in the system, but I am gonna chew all that stuff up real good right now so that those other enzymes can do their jobs later. I'm gonna swallow all this. So now the masticated hot pocket has passed down my pharynx or throat and into my esophagus, which leads to my stomach. There's actually this little cool flap of tissue called the epiglottis that blocks the trachea when I swallow so that the food doesn't end up in my respiratory system. So this ball of food that I just swallowed actually has a scientific name. It's called a bolus, and it rides a kind of wave of muscle action down the esophagus into the stomach. This wave-like contraction of the smooth muscles around the tube of the esophagus is called peristalsis, and it's basically how most of the movement in your digestive system is accomplished. Now, my hot pocket bolus is in my stomach now, which is where the food really starts getting manhandled. The stomach basically takes a scorched earth approach to digestion. It's not messing around. It's like a churning cement mixture that can contract and expand with these big accordion-like folds of muscle called rugae. Your stomach's job is to turn everything over and over, smushing and mixing all the pieces up with its cocktail of acids and enzymes called gastric juice. Gastric juice is mainly made up of hydrochloric acid, an enzyme called pepsin, and some mucus and water. Hydrochloric acid has a pH of about 1, which is strong enough that if you got it on your hand, it would give you a chemical burn, so the acid breaks things down and hopefully kills most of the bacteria that you might find on your food. And the pepsin starts breaking down proteins into amino acids. Now that mucus is important. It's there to protect your stomach so that it doesn't, like, digest itself. When you don't have enough of that mucus, you get peptic ulcers, which happen when your stomach lining comes in direct contact with your stomach acid. And the water's just in there to make everything all soupy, because what you want by the time your food leaves your stomach is chyme, which is a kind of liquidy slop that you might be familiar with from the last time you had a stomach virus. You know, this conversation was gonna have to get a little bit gross, and I didn't want to bring diarrhea into it too much because, you know, I've been eating. But when something bad is going on in your digestive tract, your body doesn't worry too much about absorbing nutrients. It just wants to get the chyme out of there. So chyme is what you see when you get the picture. Anyway, there's a little valve or sphincter between the stomach and the small intestine that regulates how much chyme gets into the small intestine and when it gets in there. The very beginning of the small intestine is called the duodenum. This is where a lot of the small intestine action happens, by which I mean lots of things get absorbed and also secreted, like bicarbonate, which neutralizes the gastric acid before it goes any further. Now, the coolness of the small intestine can't be overstated. It's ground zero for cellular exchange of nutrients and the breakdown of fats. And again, the reason it's so good at absorbing is because all of the surface area it's got going on. A lot of that surface area comes from the fact that despite its name, your small intestine is frickin' long. In a human, it can range anywhere from 4.5 to 10.5 meters. But that's not all. The whole inside is lined with epithelial tissue that has tons of ridges and folds in it. Surface area to the max. And on those ridges and folds are these little hair-like fibers of flesh called villi. Each villus has capillaries on it so that it can absorb nutrients. And get this, each villus, which is only like half a millimeter long, is covered in teeny tiny little microvilli, providing even more surface area. In fact, apparently, the small intestine has a texture kind of like velvet, which is oh, great. Now I eat the milkshake. Fantastic. Okay. So another thing the small intestine does with the help of its friend the gallbladder is break down fatty stuff, like this milkshake. Near the top of your small intestine is a little pipe where bile salts manufactured by the liver and stored by the gallbladder are squirted out into the small intestine. Bile works like dish detergent on a pan you just fried something in. It's an emulsifier. It takes hydrophobic fat molecules and breaks them up into fatty acids and monoglycerides, which can be absorbed by all that epithelial tissue. I've never had Chunky Monkey before. Nuts. After your food passes through those yards and yards of small intestine, the chyme goes through another sphincter and enters the cecum, the beginning of the large intestine. The large intestine's job is to remove most of the water and bile salts from the chyme so you don't have constant diarrhea, so you can thank it for that. It's called large because it's wider than the small intestine, but it's not nearly as long. It's basically just a 1.5 meter victory lap around the outside of the small intestine, and then it calls it good. Also, should mention, at the end of the cecum there's a little tube where the appendix comes in. For a long time, we thought that the appendix was a worthless vestigial structure that we used to need at some point in our evolution, but didn't need anymore. However, recent studies are finding that the purpose of the appendix in modern humans is probably to act as a safe house for all the good bacteria you need to help you digest your food. If you get a virus or food poisoning or something and all your digestive systems say, "Get it all out of me!" the appendix has a little sample of your gut bacteria that it spits out to help you recolonize after your illness. So I think you're probably familiar with the final step in the digestive system. That's the pooping. Your food can spend as long as 3 days in your digestive tract, and a lot of that time is spent in the large intestine, mostly reabsorbing the excess water from the chyme and prepping your poo for its great entrance into the world. When it's done, it passes through everybody's favorite sphincters, the anal sphincters. There are 2 of them, and you know, out in the world to live its own life. And that's the end of our little tale here that begins with the Hot Pocket. I hope you join us next time for more disgustingness as we discuss the details of the excretory system. Until then, bon appetit. Thank you for watching this episode of Crash Course Biology. If you want to go back and review anything, table of contents, just click on it. Thanks, of course, to everybody who helped put this episode together. If you have questions for us, please leave them in the comments below or on Facebook or Twitter, and our team of experts will attempt to answer. Goodbye.
I warned you it was going to get gross. So hopefully we got a pretty good idea of what some of this stuff looks like, though, as we sort of work through it. So big overview of the digestive system. Like he said, its whole purpose is to basically chemically and mechanically break stuff down into very, very, very small pieces. In fact, if you want to think of it, one of the best ways to think of your digestive system is to consider that its job is to make stuff so small that it can simply pass into you. And that's what's kind of confusing about the digestive system, or confusing a little bit when you consider that, like, the food as it's running through you isn't necessarily in your body yet. Like, I know it's like surrounded by us and all of that, but it's not actually in your body. We consider it to be actually outside of your body, right? It is considered to be external, but your digestive system is, it's breaking it down so small that eventually it can pass through the walls from external to your bloodstream, which is internal, right? So you want to think of it as like, you're kind of a human donut in a lot of ways. If you consider, like, this is sort of a tube, right? You would say like if this is like a hole, right? Let's say this is a donut here. We'll put some sprinkles on there and stuff, right? So there's like our there's our donut. You wouldn't consider like all the stuff on the inside. This is not in the donut in here, right? Like, it's still outside of it. It needs to pass through the walls to get inside. That's your body, right? Like, when food is sitting in here, it's not in your body. It has to pass through these walls. So how do we get something to pass through the walls of us? We need to be really, really, really small. So small that it can straight up walk through a wall, right? So the organs of your digestive system are responsible for helping you chew all that stuff up to make it mechanically smaller. Chewing, for instance, like, breaks things down into smaller pieces, and then chemically digesting them to make them even more small, right? Until eventually they get down to the size of a chemical. And again, yeah, they can then pass through the walls there. So this is our digestive system in a nutshell. It's going to be this big long tube from one end to the other. And if we give it sort of just an overall function, right? The idea behind your digestive system is that it's the system in the body responsible for the mechanical breakdown, that's the chewing, and chemical breakdown of foods, that's the processing through, digestive enzymes and things like that, and then the absorption of those nutrients. Like, don't forget, like, this is another really big important part of your digestive system. I know it's called the digestive system, but it's also the absorptive system. Its job is to get stuff to a place where it can actually absorb them, right? So when you look at the functions of your digestive system overall, it's responsible for getting food into through the tube there, right? That's ingestion. Propulsion, it's responsible for moving it throughout the tube. Mechanical processing, like chewing, right? That's physical processing. Digestion, which is like chemical processing. It needs to secrete stuff to make things easy to move around, but also it's secreting chemicals that further break things down. Absorption, which is the most important part of digestion, the whole purpose of it is for absorption, so we can actually get the nutrients in. And excretion, which is getting any of the waste products out of there. So we are mostly talking about the alimentary canal. It's this 8-meter long tube that passes all the way through your thoracic and abdominopelvic cavities. Big fancy way of saying the bottom of your stomach. And it's got a lot of different layers that do different things, right? If we were to kind of lay out your entire digestive system, this is kind of what it would look like, right? You'd have the mouth here where you would like chew things up. You've got some salivary glands, which are going to secrete saliva in there. Again, you've got mechanical processing in the mouth happening from chewing, but you've also got a little bit of chemical processing in there because your saliva helps dissolve food. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. It'll drop through your esophagus. That's the tube connecting your mouth to your stomach, where it'll sit in the stomach and get chemically digested by your stomach acid and a few other enzymes. Then eventually it'll move into your small intestine, which is this big long tube right here. The small intestine will be attached to a couple accessory organs like your pancreas, gallbladder, and liver. They're going to secrete some materials to make it easier to finish digesting anything that didn't get fully broken down in the stomach or in the mouth. And then it's going to slowly pass through the small intestine, where it's really slowly pulling out nutrients along the entire way. So carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are working their way through the walls of the small intestine into your bloodstream as they sort of travel down this tube. Then eventually it gets to your large intestine. This is actually where you're going to absorb most of your water and some of your minerals, as well as vitamins. So those things that are transported in water are going to get absorbed in here, again, into the bloodstream. And then eventually anything that's undigested or unnecessary is going to get kicked out the other end. So let's go ahead and look at this whole process of digestion here from start to finish. So digestion, by definition here, is the process by which we break down food or nutrients into their individual components, right? We take something really complex and break it down into something really simple. In fact, if we kind of just lay this out here, you've got 6 essential nutrients here in the body, right? We're going to go ahead and break this into our macronutrients and our micronutrients, right? So if I kind of give myself some space here, we have got proteins, fats, and carbs. We'll go ahead and arrange this in the nutrition label order. We'll go fats, carbs, we'll call carbohydrates because this is a science class, and proteins, right? So these things here need to be broken down into their individual components. These are our macronutrients, right? What I mean by macronutrients is that you need a lot of them every single day. We're going to come back to that concept a little bit later, but we'll put this up here. We'll say these are our macronutrients. Right. So that's kind of the main 3 here, right? So what's going to happen is, like, fats are going to break down into tinier components like lipids and cholesterols and things like that. So it's going to break down into lipids, which is our technical term for fats. Carbohydrates are going to break down into sugars. So put that here. And proteins are going to break down into amino acids, right? So we're going to take proteins, we're going to break those down into amino acids. These are the things that can actually be absorbed by your body. So the process of digestion is to take these very large materials and turn them into these 3 very small materials. And once it does that, it can pass into your bloodstream. Meanwhile, you've also got your micronutrients. These are the ones that you need in very small amounts every day. You don't need as many of these, but this is going to be your vitamins and your minerals. So we're going to have vitamins and we're going to have minerals, right? Those don't need to be broken down. Those are actually small enough as they are to pass into your bloodstream. This is actually one of the reasons why lotions and things like that are a good way to absorb certain vitamins. Doctors even will sometimes give like a topical cream for somebody who is, vitamin deficient. And then, I got a question here. Oh yeah, vitamins and minerals, they are already.
I'm sorry. So whatever you kind of rub into your body really does work.
Some of it.
Okay.
Not all of it. Yeah, don't.
I'm sorry. It's just I heard that coconut, virgin coconut oil, burns body fat if you rub it in. And I mean, I don't really use it for that, but it also makes your skin nice and whatnot. So that kind of makes me wonder, maybe you're right. Maybe it does burn fat somehow.
It certainly won't burn fat. We can kill that concept right out the gate.
Good to know. I'm that's absurd. I'm like I waste my time running in the gym. That's how I
right. Yeah. No, it certainly won't do that. But coconut is super high in fat, which is super high in vitamin E, which is very good for your skin. So it does have positive benefits for your skin. Coconut oil and things like that. Things that have coconut oil, it smells nice. There's that. But it certainly will not burn fat. That's a totally different process. That will become more clear as we move through the rest of this course. We are going to understand fat burning really well in a couple weeks, over the coming weeks. And then lastly, we've got the king of all nutrients. I'll go ahead and put this down here, and that's going to be water. Your most essential nutrient, important for literally everything. That's going to be water. You could call it a micronutrient, but that doesn't really make any sense because micro means you need it in small amounts. Water is the one that you need in the largest amounts every single day. but it's not necessarily a macronutrient either. So we kind of just put it in its own category there. So that is, those are our major categories, right? Proteins, fats, carbs, vitamins and minerals, and water. Water is also something, by the way, you can actually absorb a little bit of water through your skin. Fun fact, very, very little. It's actually one of the reasons why also water can get out of your skin. But when I say it's absorbed, I mean very, very trace amounts. It can simply pass through here and there, but usually doesn't go any further than that. And then you end up like just getting it out anyways. Your body also does have the ability to sweat things that it doesn't want out. Our skin is designed to protect us. You can think of it, I'm not a skin expert. Actually, this is not the anatomy that I've spent my time becoming an expert on. But I will say, if you think of like what your skin's purpose is, its primary purpose is to be part of your immune system. Like that's the idea here. Even like your stomach acid, right? Like we talk about stomach acid today, we're going to talk about it for digestion purposes. It does do digestion, but really probably its most important role that it has is to act as part of your immune system, killing viruses and bacteria and things like that so they don't get into your bloodstream. Your skin, its job is to keep viruses and bacteria and things like that on the outside of the body, not allowing it to get to the inside of the body. Because once it gets to the inside of the body, that's where we start to feel sick, right? So, certain things, yeah, they can be absorbed by your skin. Certain other things, though, not so much because they're there to prevent those things from getting in. And then like fat burning, totally different process. If you hear somebody say something like that, but Lord knows we've all heard plenty of things like that before. You ever hear people say you should drink cold water instead of hot water because it burns more calories? That is one of those things that is very similar to coconut oil, absorbing and being healthy for you in some ways. It is true that drinking cold water does take more energy to heat up the water to neutral, compared with like drinking hot water. It is true in the same sense that how do I put this? It's true in the same sense that like I can technically fly for a second if I jump off the roof. Like if you consider that to be like the slight amount of airtime, it's a truth in the sense that like a penny is certainly having more money than someone who's penniless. You know what I mean? Like that is it's a truth, but it's not like actually applicable. So do you actually burn more calories drinking cold water? Sure, but you probably burn 1 extra calorie, I don't know, a year if you commit to it. But it is true on a very small measurable level at some point. So that's one other thing that we got to kind of like be cautious of whenever we're talking about nutrition. Nutrition is one of those things that's really easy to sort of market in a lot of different ways. And it'd be irresponsible to say it's completely untrue, but it is also just as irresponsible to say that it is going to change someone's life, So anyway, process of digestion, right? We want to be able to get stuff small enough that it's going to pass into our bloodstream. That's the idea, right? Picture a really thin, almost like a screen door, right? If you take like a bucket of water and you throw it at a screen door, a lot of it's actually going to kind of splash and fall right back down, but some of it's going to go through, right? And that's because there's little tiny holes in that screen mesh, right? That's sort of the process of digestion. So if you were to allow, that water to splash on there and kind of try again and again and again, eventually all of it's going to get through. But if you were to take like, let's say, I don't know, chocolate pudding, which is also a liquid, and you were trying to throw it against a screen door, it would hit it and it wouldn't really go through because it's just not small enough. It's just not liquidy enough. All that chocolate stuff, all those particles are kind of like linked together enough to make it, it's still a liquid, but it's just not liquid enough, right? And so it's not going to be able to pass through. So that's the whole process of digestion. We're just trying to get it really, 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 really small. So that's going to start with chewing, right? So chewing is the first thing that we're going to do. Scientific name for that, you'll hear the term masticating. You are masticating. That's why this is your masseter, right? And so like you're going to chew up your food, and that is going to help you increase the surface area. Remember, the first place this is all going is into your stomach, right? Which is going to use acid to sort of dissolve things. So let's just imagine like acid dissolving something for a second here. Like, let's say I've got a perfectly cube-shaped piece of food, right? There we go. Well, it was a cube. So here, now what's going to happen is like acid is dissolving this from all kinds of different directions, right? Like it's going to sort of like dissolve all of this as it's sort of being exposed to it, right? It's good. It's not bad, right? So, some of this will probably get eaten away, and I'll probably end up with a smaller sort of shaped cube, Let's go ahead and we'll imagine sort of what this would look like in the end, right? Like if a giant cube of something like this kind of sat in my digestive system, yeah, it might kind of look, like this. Like it got kind of eaten away, and now it's a lot smaller than it used to be. That's good. But look at how much there is left, right? Like acid only had so much time to kind of work on this stuff. And there was such a little amount of surface area. It was only getting exposed to all the outside stuff. But what would be really cool is if I took that cube and I split it down. What happened if I divided it like this, right? So let's just say this is the same cube, but now I've divided it into 4 different pieces, right? Well, now if you consider this, this is all the same. This is the same amount of stuff, right? But now, again, I'm going to expose it to all of these different places, right? All I did was chop it up. That's all I did. I didn't change the size of how much cube there is. I just realized this is going to be really difficult for me to have to draw every time, so I'm going to copy and paste what I just drew. There's our cube. Now, all of that stomach, and now all that acid that we dropped this cube into is being dissolved from all these sides as well. Right now, it's able to get into the middle and dissolve from the middle. So what are we going to end up with? Well, we're probably going to end up with a much smaller, much more dissolved, chunk, 4 of them, in fact, right? And now they're a little bit smaller than they used to be. So now you can imagine, like, what would happen if I divided those 4 cubes into 4 pieces themselves and then divided that even smaller and smaller and smaller? That's what chewing actually does. What it does is it increases the surface area. Okay, think of surface area as this, right? Like imagine if I told you, you have to paint, gosh darn it, I keep not, there we go. Imagine if I told you have to use paint on all 4 sides here. So you have to paint this side, and you have to paint this side, and you have to paint this side, and you have to paint this side, right? It's going to take you maybe 1 bucket of paint to get all 4 sides, okay? But now what if we did the same box divided into 4? Right? So I'm going to go ahead and take half of this over here. And we'll take the other half and we'll put it over here. And then we got to close them up because now it's, it's not, they're not closed boxes anymore, right? So now you've got to paint all sides of the outside of these boxes, right? Well, that's way more surface area because this is all the same amount of surface area that you had. I mean, there's a gap here now, but this to this, to this, to this, to this, to this, to this, and this. It's exactly the same amount. So that's 1 bucket of paint around the outside. But now look, you've got a whole extra bucket of paint by painting the inside portion, right? So that's 2 buckets of paint. You doubled the surface area by dividing that box into quarter pieces. So when you're chewing, what you're actually doing is you're breaking up food into smaller chunks so that you increase surface area. And that allows all of your stomach acid to get from all different sides of things. That's why dissolving like big chunks of stuff doesn't work very well when you're trying to it's why it's, here's the perfect analogy. It's why my mom, I don't know about your parents, would yell at you, or yell at me rather. I was really bad about this when I was a kid. We would have Nesquik chocolate powder, and I would always like take a scoop and put it in my milk and like stir it up. And I would pull the wet spoon out of there and put it back in the chocolate to get like another bit. And my mom would, and my dad, both of them would be like, you have to stop putting wet stuff in the chocolate milk mix. That's why it gets those big chunks. And those big chunks don't dissolve. You know, you'd put that in and it just sits there, right? It doesn't have enough surface area. The little granulated powder, right? That's a lot of surface area. So that's the reason we actually chew. And then saliva helps us not only moisten things to make it easier to chew, but also in your saliva, you have this enzyme called salivary amylase. Okay. Salivary amylase is it's actually a pretty strong enzyme. And what it does is it's produced by your salivary glands right in here. And it releases this enzyme, which helps you break down carbohydrates in particular. So carbohydrates, again, these big, complicated, big, long chains of sugars, like we saw yesterday, right? We want to use hydrolysis to break those up. Remember yesterday we talked about two sugar molecules, a little bit of hydrogen, a little bit of oxygen, a little bit more hydrogen, and it breaks the particles up, right? That's hydrolysis, right? We shove a water molecule between two particles and they break apart, right? Well, salivary amylase is an enzyme. Remember yesterday we said enzymes help speed up chemical reactions. Hydrolysis is a chemical reaction. So salivary amylase helps us further break down carbohydrates really fast. He mentioned it in the video, but this is one of the reasons why if you chew like a piece of bread and you keep chewing it, bread and other carbohydrates actually start to taste sweeter the longer they're in your mouth. And that's because the sweetness of something, how much it tastes sweet, is based on how simple the sugars that are in it are. So for instance, like if you take a teaspoon of white granulated sugar, you know, like cane sugar, it tastes really freaking sweet when you put it in your mouth, right? But if you take like the equivalent number of grams of sugar found in like a piece of rice, like if it's white rice, it's going to taste a little bit sweet, but not as sweet as like granulated sugar did. You do like a potato, a little bit less sweet, but certainly, you know, still more sweet than like something else. But the longer you chew it, the more you start to break the sugars in it down. I used to do an experiment in class with everybody, and I would hand out saltine crackers, and you would chew them, and it was really gross actually, because the whole class, and I would say, we're going to chew for 60 seconds, like one cracker for 60 seconds, right? And it gets really, you try not to think too much about it while you're doing it because it gets real nasty. But you'll notice that like it starts to taste sweet. And that's because the big long chains of carbohydrates are getting divided down into sugars, and then you are tasting the sugars. Yeah, it was gross. And then one student one time was like, we should have a contest to see who can handle this the best. And I was like, we are not doing that because I did not want somebody to like on my floor. So that's salivary amylase. That kid was crazy. Salivary amylase produced by your salivary glands, and it splits up starches and glycogens and things like that into what we call disaccharides. Disaccharides, by the way, are double sugars. Yeah, right. They'll just make everybody do it themselves. So there's some other things in your saliva as well, by the way. You've got electrolytes in there. It's kind of funny that allows things to kind of get back and circle around throughout your body. Yeah, you'll find like sodium and potassium and things like that in your saliva. You'll have some other digestive enzymes. Lingual lipase is another one. It's very similar to salivary amylase, except that it helps break down fats. So if you've ever wondered why the world that we live in has such a problem with overeating sugars and fats, it's because they break down very, very quickly in our mouth, and they release their delicious tastiness really quickly. And so our brain lights up a lot faster compared with like proteins, which break down a little bit more slowly once you get to your digestive system. So, you know, some people are more sugar people, other people are more fatty people. Depending on what you like the most. I tend to be I don't know, I guess I kind of skate the line, but I think I like savory fatty stuff, you know. Like that's like a big thing for me. There's a lot of times we'll be out to a restaurant, I'll be like, they're like, do you want dessert? And I'll be like, I'd like another steak is what I'd like, you know. Like, and that's because like fats also break down a little bit in your saliva, not a lot, but just a little. So it's just kind of helping the next little section there. So then you're going to move food from your mouth into your esophagus. That's the tube that attaches to your stomach. So it'll move into there. There's some sphincters there. Sphincters basically are nothing more than like a hole that closes down and can open back up. You know, in like sci-fi movies, like sci-fi movies, they always have like the kind of fancy, yeah, fat is where it's at. Yeah, I'm with you, man. I tend to be like more of a like I love fatty stuff. Um, but like they sometimes they'll have like the doors. Yeah, they get like chump doors and the doors that do that. But a lot of times you'll see the really fancy ones. Maybe they'll look like that. I don't know. Or the ones that like close like this, like they go and then they open up this way. It's always kind of a really fancy one. That's kind of what a sphincter is, really. It's basically like a muscular section of a tube that can close down. Like all of your veins, for instance, have like sphincters on them, right? We call those precapillary sphincters, and it allows your blood vessels to close down so that blood doesn't go to one area and it will force it to go somewhere else. So for instance, when you start exercising, all of the sphincters that are in the blood vessels to your digestive system actually close down, and your digestive system slows while you're working out. Meanwhile, all the sphincters that are in your muscles open up. And so it actually promotes blood flow to your muscles. And that's one of the ways that we allow blood to get where it's going. It's why your hands feel a little warmer when you're exercising, and like the surface of your skin feels hot. Then once you're done, your body's like, great, we're in resting mode. So it closes the sphincters to your muscles, opens them up to your digestive system, and that speeds up your digestive system, allowing you to get nutrients in to fix all the problems that you just caused by working out. It's like, you broke all the quads. What did you do? Your body's going to get some blood flow over there so it can, fix all that stuff. Thanks to your lunges. So your esophagus has got a couple sphincters on it. That's what they're mentioning here. We'll just go ahead and move through those. And then eventually it'll get into your actual stomach. Actually, one thing I'm forgetting. Peristalsis. We need to be able to move food throughout our digestive tract. And, if you were to hang upside down, for instance, you could still move food through your digestive tract. And that's because of little contractions. Your digestive tract does have, we call it smooth muscle. It is muscle in a capacity that it has its ability to contract. They're very, very weak contractions. None of us are going to go to the gym and do curls with our small intestine. But it does have like a little bit of contracting ability. And so it'll squeeze kind of like this, these little wave-like contractions to kind of promote moving food from one place to another. I always think of it as like, when you're at the end of a tube of toothpaste, you do that thing where you go to the end and you're like squeezing it down so it gets to the very end. That's kind of what peristalsis is like. And that's what propels things along. So it'll go from the esophagus down this tube here into the actual stomach. And you can see a good picture of the stomach here with these little kind of interesting little ridges and waves. That's what we're going to see in there. So summarizing everything we've talked about so far, we start by masticating our food. Masticating is opening and closing the jaws, and we're grinding it a little bit side to side, chewing up your food. We're making your food from big, large chunks into little tiny chunks. And that increases the surface area, making it easier for your stomach acid to dissolve things. So when your mom told you to chew your food because you will digest it better, she was telling the truth. That does make it a little bit easier. Now, sometimes you'll hear people say that will also make it easier for you to absorb nutrients overall. There's probably some truth to that. It's a very difficult to measure thing. How many nutrients are actually getting absorbed, because your digestive system can choose to simply leave something in there longer. And if it leaves it in there longer, eventually it'll all get dissolved. So we don't have like direct proof of how that works or anything, but it's part of the physiology of digesting. So probably if we've got the anatomy and we're designed to do it, we should probably take the time to do it. That's my advice to people. I get questions from my clients all the time, and they're like, is it better to chew your food for longer? Does that, increase absorption of nutrients? And it's another one of those things where it's like, You probably, but we don't know how much it does. It's a very difficult thing for us to be able to measure, you know? But yes, probably. But good advice. You've got the equipment, you've got the pieces, you might as well do it. And who knows, we might all lose our teeth when we get older. um, my grandma would be super stoked that I said that. She hasn't had teeth for decades. Chewing, really, really important. Physical swallowing, really, really important. Peristalsis, that's going to move food from point A to point B. Now, eventually, it's going to land in your stomach. Your stomach is this kind of interesting shape. It's kind of like a big J, uppercase J, right? It's a J-shaped pouch, and it has a bunch of different layers. Look at this, guys. This is kind of cool if you look at it, right? It's got these little folds on the inside. Those are called your rugae. And then look at these different layers. Like this one goes this way, this one goes this way, this one goes back this way. And then there's a little bit of this direction on the outside there, but that's mostly just an outer protective layer. So what the heck is up with that? Why do we have so many different layers of the lining of our stomach? Well, those different layers are actually secreting different types of mucus. Mucus, a super fun thing to talk about. But think of mucus almost like, think of it as something that's very, very, very base. Not going to talk too much about pH today, but basically, if you think of the pH scale, right? Let's see here, pH scale. You look at it, it looks something kind of like this, right? You're going to find different things on the pH scale. We're pretty neutral. We're right in the middle, right? So you've got your acids over here on the low end, and you've got your bases over here on the high end, right? So you think of bleach as very base, and you can think of like lemon or vinegar as very acidic, right? Now here's what's interesting. They put a little poison face on this. That's hydrochloric acid right there. Hydrochloric acid is an extremely acidic material, extremely acidic. It is super, super, super good at breaking stuff down. In fact, it's so good at it, he said it in the video, if you were to take a tablespoon of your own stomach acid, the stuff that is inside your body right now, and pour it on your arm, it would start to dissolve your arm. It would give you a chemical burn, similar to touching, if you were a kid, you ever, you know, your batteries and your toys would explode. If you ever touch that, like that battery acid, it would kind of burn your hand. I did that a lot. I was Morgan, so a lot of leaving stuff out in the rain. That burns like crazy. That's what hydrochloric acid is actually very similar to. So it has a poison symbol on it, yet our body makes it. It's actually, you know, inside there. So what's up with that? How are we, you know, having this acid inside our body? Well, mucus is really kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum here. Your mucus that your stomach is also creating is very base. And so it neutralizes that acid. So if your stomach acid ever tries to leak through and start eating your own stomach, your stomach will actually make more of the mucus, and the mucus kind of cancels it out, and eventually it lands somewhere in the middle, and it's not enough to actually destroy your own stomach lining. So it cannot dissolve itself anymore. Now, that doesn't always happen. If you get like, I believe it's H. pylori, which is a bacteria that you'll sometimes find. If you get too much of that, for instance, that bacteria can actually cause stomach ulcers, because what it does is that bacteria neutralizes your mucus, which allows your stomach acid to dissolve your stomach. And so you'll get a hole in your actual stomach. And that's not so good. That's what causes heartburn and things like that. Usually people who get heartburn, it's where they get stomach acid right up in here. People who suffer from like disordered eating and things like that can also get very bad ulcers, and it can cause a lot of like discomfort and problems later in life. So definitely something we are trying to avoid. But your stomach, getting back to your stomach acid and looking at digestion here, it is an extremely acidic material responsible for chemically breaking down food. I'm going to show you guys a really cool video of how stomach acid works a little bit later in our next course. Other materials that are in your stomach acid, though, you also do not just have the acid, you also have gastric juice. Gastric juice, a really fun name for like a punk band. is secreted by your stomach acid, or secreted into your stomach acid, which helps with that process. One of the things that you're going to find in gastric juice is what is known as pepsin. Pepsin aids in the digestion of proteins. Remember earlier we talked about how your mouth is actually helpful when it comes to processing carbohydrates and when it comes to processing fats. Well, what about proteins? How do we break those down? Well, proteins are held together with a kind of a unique type of bond. It's called a peptide bond, a little bit different than your classic bond that holds carbohydrates together. It's just a little bit stronger. So we need to have a stronger enzyme that can really knock out that bond and break it down so that we can get those amino acids that we were talking about, right? So peptide bonds hold your amino acids together, and pepsin is the enzyme that helps break that down. There's also some other things in there. There's more lingual lipase helping break down fats. There's a few more enzymes that are helping break down carbohydrates in there as well. And that's your gastric juice in a nutshell. You can see there's actually a bunch of them listed here. You don't have to have all these memorized or anything. But there's pepsin, there's enterokinase, lipase, a bunch of them. So their job is to help kind of break those down. I'm not making you guys memorize friggin' enzymes. They did that to me in school, and it's a nightmare. So that's never going to be on your test. Except for maybe pepsin. That's the only one they want you to know pepsin is because in your NASM test, you will hear amino acids are held together with peptide bonds. So put those words together. Yeah, you'll find some of this, Marielle, in chapter, I think it's maybe 17, I think is digestion.
It really helped me, you know, like I read chapter 20 and everything you were kind of going over yesterday, like glucosis and you know, all that stuff was in there, ATP, what it meant, you know, like everything basically was kind of like, okay, I understand. It kind of broke, and you even wrote down some of the formulas that it gives you, the C6, the C.
Oh,
C6,
really? You don't have to do that.
C6. Well, you know, I was just trying to really kind of like, just in case it's my test, you know, I want to make sure.
You would have to know that in a traditional full-on physiology school. That textbook, your Memler's textbook, is a pre-med biology book. You know, for people on like that tract. But yeah, no, that's great. So that's basically digestion. Now, for the most part, the heavy lifting of digestion's done, guys. For the most part, like once we're done with the stomach, that's most of the digestion part. Now there is a little bit more that's going to happen, but for the most part, a lot of the big heavy lifting of taking large chunks into small chunks is done. But again, we do need to get things small enough to actually pass into our bloodstream. Love that plan. So that is where let's go. Put that one in type. So that is where our small intestine starts to come in. So moving into the process of absorption, right? Absorption is the process of allowing chemicals to pass from the digestive system actually into your bloodstream. Here's how I like to think of it. You guys know when you go to the doctor's office and or like when you're a kid, you went to like your pediatrician and had that like kid's toy with the shapes, you know, and the idea was that you had to take the little blocks and put them in the put them in the right shapes, right? That is kind of how your digestive system works. Now, that sounds really weird, but if we imagine proteins as stars, fats as a little hexagon here, and carbohydrates as a square, those are the three things that can fit into your digestive system. Maybe vitamins are diamond shape, and minerals are oval shaped, and you know, there's our water there, right? So when a virus or a bacteria, which is not necessarily actually food shaped, tries to get into your bloodstream, hopefully it got destroyed by your stomach acid. But when something that isn't food tries to get into your bloodstream, your body doesn't have the tools to break that down. You know what's really weird about hydrochloric acid is I could take a bunch of, like, let's say this jar was hydrochloric acid. Actually, it looks something kind of like that. It's very clear when you look at it. I could put it in that glass. That's not really going to do anything. It doesn't really dissolve glass very well. If I were to put plastic in there, like let's say I took like, I got a roll of tape here, like if I put some of that roll of tape in hydrochloric acid, for the most part, it would leave it alone. It wouldn't do anything. And it's because like, that's just not really the tool to break something down. Or at least not break this stuff down. You know what I mean? So that's a big part of understanding digestion as well. You have to remember that like only food is supposed to get into your bloodstream. Now, it's not always true. Like certain things can get broken down small enough that they do actually get into your bloodstream. And those are the things that kind of start to cause like a lot of problems. I'm not going to spend too much time on this today because we've got a lot to get through, but I'll talk more about this in our nutrition class. It's one of the reasons why I personally don't really love artificial sweeteners. Not things like stevia. Stevia is like plant-based. I'm okay with that one. But when you look at like man-made sugars, right? Those things aren't really food. So your body doesn't really know what to do with them. And for the most part, because they're not actually food, the reason they have 0 calories is because they can't get into your bloodstream. They're too big and they don't get broken down. They sit in your stomach acid and they're sitting there kind of waiting. They're in the fluid. They're not really doing much. They pass into your small intestine. They're sitting there. They don't really do anything. They can't get absorbed. They can't get further broken down. We know they're not food because we don't have the tools necessary to break them down. So then they kind of just keep passing through. And then for the most part, you just pee them out. That's what happens. They go straight into your kidneys, right into your bladder. You pee them out. That's fine. No big deal. No muss, no fuss. But every now and then an artificial sweetener will get broken down. Something happens, it's man-made chemicals, not perfect every time. And so it gets small enough that it does somehow pass into your bloodstream. And when that happens, it's in you kind of forever. Like your body doesn't know what to do with it. It doesn't have the tools to break it down. And it's like, I can't kill this thing. It's not really causing us too much harm. I don't know what to do with it. So what it'll usually do is it'll just put we call it a cyst around it. It'll create like a little bubble around it. And usually it'll store it in some like fat tissue. So it'll find like a place where you've got some fat and it'll just kind of shove it there. And your immune system will kind of not really keep an eye on it. It just kind of puts it there and leaves it there forever. No big deal, really, for the most part, until that thing starts, it is made up of, we got to get even smaller here. It's made up of atoms, right? And if it starts to steal other atoms like to bond together, right? And if it starts to do that from the surrounding tissues, this is where there is a connection between like artificial sweeteners and certain types of cancers. And we'll talk, like I said, we'll talk more about this in later classes, but it's one of the reasons why, in my opinion, if it's not food, you really shouldn't be putting it in your body. Proteins, fats, carbs, vitamins, minerals, water. For the record, alcohol can fall into that category as well. It is technically a nutrient in the sense that your body does have the tools to break it down. However, it is not a good nutrient, but at least it's not linked to as many of the other things that we're talking about. There's no redeeming alcohol. It doesn't have any nutritional value whatsoever. It only makes things a little bit worse, but at least your body does have tools necessary to process it. So anyway, we'll talk more about that later, but that's a good way to, I always like to talk about that whenever I'm talking about absorption, because again, that's one of the reasons why, if you've ever seen your dog eat something they're not supposed to, like a candy wrapper or something like that, and it comes out the other end on your lawn and it still looks like a candy wrapper, the reason why is because plastic, ink, things like that, they aren't really processed very well by our digestive tract because they're not food. We don't have the tools necessary to break them down. There's ways to break down plastics. They've figured out how to make a special bacteria recently that can do that actually. But this type of thing, not so much. So absorption is the process of allowing actual food to pass into our bloodstream. We've got slots designed for all of our different nutrients. So here's your small intestine. Not very small when you look at it laid out like this. The reason they call it the small is because it's the skinny intestine. You've got a big fat one that's a little bit shorter. That's your large intestine. So the small intestine here, very, very long. And this is the primary absorption site by the body. You'll notice it looks a little bit different in its different sections here, right? You can see there's our duodenum. That's the first section. Now, the duodenum, or the duodenum, if you want to say it that way, there is a little bit of digestion that does take place here, just a little bit. Your fats, for instance. Fats didn't get fully broken down. Some of it in the mouth, right? Not a little, maybe a little bit in the stomach, but for the most part, fats are kind of left alone. And it's because fats are actually super easy to break down. And so we wait until we get to the small intestine, and that's where we actually finish off fats. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But then the primary site for absorption is going to be the jejunum here and the ileum. And then eventually the ileum will attach to your large intestine, which will finish everything out. And that's where you're going to absorb all your water. So, like I said, and you can see they're just kind of talking about the different layers there. Now, here's what's really cool about your intestine, your small intestine, right? Like I said, it's the primary site for absorption. Now, we talked about earlier about increasing surface area by chewing things up. Well, now we're going to increase the surface area of our digestive system rather than having a tube like this, right? Rather than just having like a big empty tube, gosh darn it, kind of like this, this has surface area, sure. Like if you were to paint all of this wall here, yeah, there would definitely be a good amount of surface area there, right? But what if on this wall instead, we had all these little folds that look like this? This is actually one way that we are sort of increasing surface area, right? Rather than doing it the way we were. So here we've got, this is kind of what our small intestine actually looks like. Now, think of it this way. You have to paint all this stuff, right? Like this is so much more to paint. I mean, look at how much longer it's taking me just to trace this out compared to how long it would take me to trace this out, like more surface area, right? It takes longer to paint. Well, it also takes, now we've got way more sites for absorption, right? We can absorb through all of these walls here, but we're not done yet. We're actually not done. In fact, these are very large ridges. And if you were to zoom in like crazy, you would actually see a whole bunch of more ridges even on these folds here. So it's actually going to go like this on every single one of these folds. And so it'll actually look kind of like that. These little finger-like projections on all of these folds. I'm not going to do that all the way. That is what we call your intestinal villi. And it looks something kind of like this. So you look, there's the ridges. And then on every ridge, there are these little tiny fingers here projecting out. In fact, it looks something more like this. These are what all those little finger projections actually look like. Now that is way increasing surface area, right? Like so much more, right? Let's see here. How much surface area is there in the intestinal villi? There is about 6,000 to 25,000 square inches of tissue. So let's say here, 25,000 square inches. How big? That's 173 square feet. Average tennis court is about 27 feet. So you have got a couple tennis courts worth of surface area in just your small intestine alone. Fun fact. That is how much we are able to increase surface area by having all these little finger-like folds here, right? So inside each one of these individual little like big folds here, and we've got all those little fingers, what you're going to see on the inside are these little blood vessels. They look something kind of like this. Those are your capillaries. That is where, if you were to look at this, you would be actually absorbing your nutrients, right? Let's see here. So this is actually where the absorption of nutrients is going to take place. So if you were to like move a nutrient, like let's say you've got a carbohydrate right here, right? It is going to get so small that it can pass through this wall here, and now it's exposed to your bloodstream. So what's it going to do? Well, it's going to get travel. Actually, I'm going the wrong direction. It's going to go this way, and it's going to travel down, and now it's in the blood system, and so it is able to get to the heart, and then it's going to get pumped around to wherever it needs to go and deliver those nutrients to you. Right. So that is actually what we're talking about when we say absorption. This is how things are getting so small. The walls of these little materials here are so small that nutrients can straight up pass straight through them. They are the screen door we talked about earlier. Or you can think of them as, you know, that kid's toy in a doctor's office, right? So your small intestine is the primary site for absorption because it has all of your intestinal villi, which are these little microscopic projections that are lining your small intestine filled with blood vessels. And the blood vessels are what will carry the nutrients throughout the body. There's also some microvilli. You can see that in the picture here. See these little hairs, guys, on the outside here? Those little hairs, those are your microvilli. Microvilli are basically a form of what we call cilia. It's the hair you'll find around the outside of cells. And basically, like, let's imagine for a second, we'll go to this picture. Let's imagine for a second you've got a carbohydrate slot, you know, over here, right? Like this is a slot for carbohydrates right here, but you get a carbohydrate that lands over here. Well, these little hair-like projections, they can basically kind of go like this, and they can kind of move it along until it gets sucked in. It gets to the right slot. So that's kind of the purpose of your microvilli. They're really just little hairs that kind of help move the materials around. If like there's an undigested thing sitting over here, they'll kind of wiggle enough to get it moved around and then sucked in the right slot. So at the end of your small intestine, there will be a little sphincter, again, leaving stuff in there so that it has time to get absorbed. And then eventually, once everything is really absorbed, it'll open up and that'll allow it to pass into your large intestine. And your large intestine is, like I said, this additional site for absorption. It mostly takes in water and materials that are carried by water. So that's going to be, water itself, and vitamins, particularly your water soluble vitamins. We're going to talk about the two categories of vitamins later. You get fat soluble ones; those do get absorbed in your small intestine. But then you've got the water soluble ones. Those are your B vitamins, your B6, B12, all your B vitamins, and vitamin C. All of those get absorbed in the large intestine. And then your electrolytes like sodium and potassium, calcium, and other minerals, those are also very easily absorbed in water. Those will also be found being absorbed in your large intestine. So that is the digestive tract in a nutshell. Last thing we got to talk about is we got to circle back to our small intestine here real quick. I mentioned breaking down fats, right? Fats are actually really easy to break down. But they do need a material in order for that to happen. So we've got some accessory organs that are attached to your digestive system. You look at your accessory organs here. This is kind of what it looks like, right? You've got your liver right here. There's your spleen and your pancreas. There's your digestive tract, right? That's just a small section of the small intestine there. So these little things are simply attached to the digestive system. Actually, there's a very simple but very good picture, right? So there's your esophagus, there's your stomach, and there's your small intestine. And then here's your pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. These three little organs that are not part of the tube, but they do secrete stuff onto the tube, right? Like they're there to just kind of spit things in to your digestive system. And they're all attached with a little duct right here at the very, very, very beginning of your small intestine. Remember the duodenum? The duodenum? That is where they're secreting all their materials. So your liver is probably the most important of all three of them, not only for other purposes, because it also does stuff internally in the body, But it's very, very important here externally because when it comes to digestion, your liver is making this material called bile. Okay, so bile is really interesting, actually. So bile are these little salts that it makes. This is going to be a nasty picture, but this is kind of yellowish, nasty looking fluid here. And what bile does is it actually breaks down fat. So you guys know when you're cooking dinner and let's say you're making like a hamburger meat, right? So you grill up some hamburger meat, right? And there's just a ton of grease left over after hamburger. Even if you get the lean stuff, it's still just a ton of grease left over in the pan, right? And if you take that pan over to your sink and you run water onto it, it kind of doesn't do anything, like the water just kind of hits the grease and it just kind of stays there, right? You make bacon, same thing, grease just kind of stays there, right? Well, that's because grease is mostly fat. And water and fat don't mix. You always hear people say it's like those people get along like oil and water, right? In fact, let's look at a picture of that. Oil and water. Look what happens, right? Like they don't mix. Oil is less dense than water, so it floats to the top every time. Makes these big globules, right? And if you leave that enough time, eventually it'll just kind of all float to the top. So no matter how much you try to get oil and water to mix, they just don't, right? But if you were, how do you get that grease off the pan? Use a little bit of dish soap, right? So you squirt a little bit of dish soap on there, and dish soap acts as what we call an emulsifier. When you emulsify a fat, what that means is you are breaking these fat globules up into really, really, really tiny pieces. So if you had a beaker of water and you put a bunch of oil in it, it wouldn't mix, right? Put a spoon in there, mix it up like crazy, it doesn't do anything. But if you take a couple drops of dish soap and you put it in there and you stir it up again, it'll actually dissolve and it'll make this kind of weird looking paste in there. And that's actually all of the oil kind of evenly distributed throughout the water, right? And that's what emulsifiers do. When you emulsify the water, it allows the oil to get exposed. Emulsifiers basically break up the oil particles. If you look at the way oil actually works, right? It looks something kind of like this. It's got this really kind of interesting membrane that it forms, looking like this. And so water can't really penetrate through this membrane. But if you use an emulsifier, it breaks the membrane up, and that's what allows it to kind of get evenly distributed throughout the water. So bile inside the human body is kind of like dish soap. It really is. It's an accessory organ your liver is an accessory organ that makes bile, and bile is basically dish soap. And so it secretes a little bit of this dish soap material. Now, I'm not telling you to eat dish soap, by the way. But it secretes this material into your small intestine there, and that emulsifies the fats, and it breaks it down into individual fatty acids, which can then be actually absorbed into your bloodstream. So that's as much as it takes. Like you had to do all this hard work to break down proteins and carbs, but fat, you just use a little bit of bile, boom, it breaks it up, instantly ready to get digested. And that's why fats are one of the easier digested materials out there in the body. So bile, like I said, acting as an emulsifier. It's this yellow, nasty looking liquid. And it's very good at breaking up like your fats, cholesterols, even electrolytes a little bit, and allows those materials to actually get absorbed. Now, here's the thing about bile, though. Your liver is kind of just always making it and secreting it. Like whenever it makes some, it just kicks it right out the factory, like no matter what, right? But you're not eating all the time. So what happens when you haven't eaten in a while, and then all of a sudden you eat like a really big fatty meal? Well, unfortunately, your liver doesn't really store up any of that bile. It doesn't hold on to any of it. So it's just kind of secreting it whenever it has it, which means if you have like a really fatty meal, you probably don't have enough bile to break down all the fat in that, and then it won't get absorbed. So what we need is an extra little accessory organ that can kind of hold on to a big storage of bile. and it can kind of store it up and save it for a big meal, right? Well, luckily we have that organ. That is called your gallbladder. Now, your gallbladder doesn't actually make anything. It doesn't do anything on its own. All it is a big empty chamber for storing bile. So you can see we've got our liver here and a little duct that travels down, and it doesn't go straight to the small intestine. What it does is it goes to here and it stores any extra bile in the gallbladder. So it's this little small pear-shaped organ that attaches to your liver and it stores the bile. And then its job is to secrete the bile whenever you have like a big meal. So it doesn't make anything on its own, which is one of the reasons why you'll hear people get their gallbladder removed. You can remove a gallbladder and you can be just fine. My mom had her gallbladder removed a couple of years ago, right? Usually the reason that happens, by the way, your liver processes like different, it's also a filter on the inside of your body. And so sometimes those filtered materials will work their way back and they'll get into this duct here and you'll get like calcium crystals or sodium crystals. And then that will attach to other sodium crystals or other calcium crystals. And eventually it forms like a big rock. And you'll be left with a gallstone. And they can get really big. I mean, your gallbladder is only about this big. And that's actually what a gallstone looks like. My mom actually still has hers because that thing, tried to kill her. So she keeps it as a weird trophy. My mom is a weirdo. But that's basically a bunch of extra like sodium and calcium particles and even potassium and things like that, like just minerals that basically got leaked out and all started kind of forming together. It's also what a kidney stone kind of is, except a kidney stone's way smaller. And so if that happens, you would think it's like, oh, well, why don't we go in there and just get the stone out and fix the gallbladder? Theoretically, someday we'll probably be able to do that. But at this point, it's just your gallbladder is not super necessary. So they just cut it out of there and you can live just fine without it. It's not making anything. Your liver is what makes the the bile, right? Now, if you don't have a gallbladder, it just means that your liver is basically, they're going to connect it directly to your small intestine there with no connection tube. And what that'll do, if you ever have like a really fatty meal, you might have some gastrointestinal distress because you can't process some of those fats. So they're going to come out the other end full and not broken down. That can cause some problems, but it's not exactly like unhealthy. Now, they also share a tube with your pancreas. I'm still talking about, sorry, I got a little ahead of my slides here. So gallbladder, yep, secreting the materials in the end, that's your bile, and it emulsifies all those fats. Now, you've also got your pancreas here. Your pancreas is also an accessory organ. Now, you're probably familiar with the pancreas because it is responsible for producing your insulin inside the body, but outside the body, it's actually secreting enzymes like pancreatic amylase and pancreatic lipase. These are materials that are going to help break down any carbohydrates and fats that didn't get broken down from our other materials. So for the most part, your stomach acid and your stomach are responsible for the heavy lifting of digestion. But if there was some stuff that happened to survive, that's why you've got your pancreas. Your pancreas is going to release some extra little enzymes at the very end of digestion, right there at the very first part of the small intestine, just to ensure that everything is fully broken down. So in the end, we got to talk about our last process of digestion, which is the elimination part. Eventually, it'll work its way into your large intestine. Like I said, water's going to get pulled out of this wet, goopy mixture until eventually we are dehydrating all that wet, goopy stuff. So because we're dehydrating, what does that do, guys? Dehydration synthesis, molecules start to come together, right? We pull the water out of it, so they're attracted to one another, and it starts to form a solid, more commonly referred to as your poops, right? So we pull all the water out of that. It all kind of comes together as a solid, and your large intestine's fairly muscular, so it also squeezes it down using like things like your colon, squeeze it down into a easily compactable, easily exitable poops, right? So then eventually it'll work its way out of your body and you'll eliminate that out of there. And the only thing you were left with are all of your waste products. And that is the process of digestion. So starts in the mouth by breaking stuff down with chewing and your saliva, drops it into your stomach where the stomach acid and all the enzymes in your stomach acid help break down food, except for fats. Fats survive pretty well in your stomach. Passes into the very first part of your small intestine where your liver created some bile, dropped it in the gallbladder, dropped it into the tube, and released it into the actual small intestine. That's where your fats finally get broken down. Right now, you don't have any fats anymore. Now you've only got individual little lipids. You don't have carbohydrates anymore. You've only got sugars. You don't have proteins anymore. You've got amino acids, right? Those things are all small enough that they get sucked into your small intestine, and now they are in your bloodstream. So all the nutrients getting pulled out and pulled out and pulled out until eventually there really aren't any nutrients left in that wet, soupy mixture anymore. At least there aren't any macronutrients left. There's no fats, there's no proteins, there's no carbs left for the most part. But what there is still some of are your water-soluble vitamins and your minerals. So you move that wet, soupy mixture into your large intestine. Vitamins get sucked in with the water, minerals get sucked in with the water, water gets sucked in with the water, until eventually there's no water left, and it's a big solid mass, and it gets out of the body. And that is how we get nutrients from outside of us to the inside of us. It's a big, long tear. Normally, I like to take more time for questions, but we had a lot to get through so far. We still got a little bit to get through, but any questions on digestion so far, guys? Questions, comments, anything unclear? How we all doing? Who's still awake?
Still standing here.
Love it, right? You're like, I'm limping, but I'm on 2 feet.
Take in, but I'm here.
Cool, love it. Again, really what I want you guys to just is have a good general idea of how all this works. Yeah, I don't need you to have every term memorized or anything like that. That's not the purpose of this. We're really just trying to get a really good visual idea of how stuff overall functions. We will break down the specifics of all of these things later. But today it's really meant to be, we're really starting with concepts here in the first 5 days of class. It's really just meant to be, it's like, here's how, get a better understanding of how it works. And that way we don't fall for stuff, thinking like certain things, get absorbed by the body in certain ways. Like this is one of the reasons why like people will say like, hey, take this supplement because it'll help you burn fat faster, unless that supplement is straight up caffeine, it really doesn't like burn fat very well. This is one of the reasons I don't want to get super into this because I will rant about it for a half hour and I still got to do nutrients with you guys. But it's one of the reasons why I don't like cleanses. Here's the thing about cleanses. A lot of them involve like drinking certain juices, and juices are super high in vitamins and minerals. So I actually really like cleanse juices. I think they're great as an addition to a normal diet. But the idea that that's the only thing you eat for a little while because it somehow goes into your body, grabs toxins and pulls it out. Based on the anatomy that I just gave you guys, does it sound like a special juice is going to somehow go in, get into your bloodstream, grab something, come out of your bloodstream, and then exit the body? It doesn't really make any sense, right? Now, sure, like if you're eating like a really high fiber meal, it might pull some stuff out the other end, right? But like you don't actually get a lot of fiber in a juice cleanse. You just drink a lot of juice. So yeah, it has like a lot of like vitamins and minerals in it. And I think those juices are pretty friggin' healthy. But the idea of like eating only those things that's going to somehow get into your body, eat away your fat, and then make its exit out of your body, that would like, until we invent like little micro robots that can like fly into your bloodstream and like shoot stuff on the walls and then like fly out of your, until we invent that stuff, like cleansing is not going to destroy fat. Like that's just not the way it's going to operate. That's really the reason we're kind of going over some of this stuff. We're really just trying to get a broad overview of things. Now, let's go ahead and wrap things up today by just talking about nutrition. I know the notes look really long, but this part actually goes pretty darn quick. So, especially because we are going to be revisiting this a lot this module. So a typical meal is going to contain all kinds of carbohydrates, all kinds of proteins, all kinds of fats, lots of vitamins and lots of minerals, and hopefully some water in there as well. And your digestive system is going to handle all those things a little bit differently depending on what they are. You know, they all break down slightly differently. For instance, I said earlier, fats are super easy to break down. If you were to have a diet entirely composed of fat, you actually would burn less calories every day because your digestive system's like, all right, let's do, oh, this is actually very easy. And then your digestive system ends up not working very hard. Now, you shouldn't be burning most of your calories by digesting food anyways, but this is actually one of the reasons why bodybuilders, when they are on a cut, will eat super high protein diets, like way too high. But they do it because protein is actually the most difficult for your body to break down. So your body actually will burn extra calories based on a super high protein diet. For the record, there are some side effects that it's not great. Don't take that as advice to go on a super high protein diet. You should be on an adequate protein diet. Get enough, but doing more isn't really healthier for you. It can burn some extra calories simply because protein is very difficult to break down. Fat, kind of on the opposite spectrum, very easy to break down. Carbohydrates, somewhere in the middle. So they all get broken down in different ways. They all dissolve in different capacities. But when we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about the means by which some organism, you and me, is intaking nutrients. And those nutrients are responsible for us maintaining us, right? You and me, we are all made of only these 6 things: proteins, fats, carbs, vitamins, minerals, and water. That's it. That's what makes up you and me. We don't have anything else in us. Again, earlier I talked about, like, you know why you can't taste plastic? This is going to be weird. I apologize, I'm a weirdo. But if I lick this, right? The reason this doesn't have a taste is because it's not a food. It doesn't have any chemicals in there. So we don't have taste buds that can process it. There's probably some animal out there that can have a taste of plastic. They can figure, it tastes like something because it has chemicals in it that are similar to your, to something that is like a food for them. So their taste bud can recognize it and, decide to chew it up, right? So that's how we do it, right? That's what these things actually are. So like food, if you can taste it, it's probably food. For the most part. That's not always true now that we've invented a lot of stuff that tastes certain ways, even if it is not food. Thanks, food scientists. But for the most part, that's kind of a good general rule of thumb. So your nutrients are your proteins, fats, and carbs, vitamins, your minerals, and your water. So we're going to divide these into major categories, okay? We're going to divide them into macronutrients. Macronutrients, macro comes from the word that means very large, and micro comes from the word that means very small. So macronutrients you need in very large amounts. It's actually why we say you need this many grams of protein, this many grams of fat, this many grams of carbohydrates. And then when you look at like a vitamin, it'll say this many milligrams or this many micrograms of vitamin A, B, C, D, whatever. So your vitamins and your minerals, those are your micronutrients. And then water is the most important of all because it's involved in the process of digestion. Remember, hydrolysis is what breaks up our molecules. So we need to have water molecules that can bust stuff up. Every bit of our metabolism, internal and external, is necessary with the use of water. Now, obviously, there's calories as well. For the record, calories are not actually nutrients. Calories don't technically exist. And what I mean by that is, like, they're not a thing that you can hold. Like, if you were to tell me, like, you can't tell me to hold an inch or hold an hour or hold a mile or hold a degrees, like a degree in temperature, right? Like we can't, those are all things that we sort of invented for us to kind of understand the world we live in, right? Well, that's what calories are. Calories are a measuring tool. They are like an inch or a mile or anything like that. They're not actually a nutrient, right? So a calorie is the amount of energy, the amount of heat needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree, and we use Celsius, which is kind of crazy because like 1 gram of water is like a single drop of water, so it's very, very little. So what we'll instead do is we use what's called the kilocalorie. Nobody ever calls it that, but that's technically the calories we actually see on a real nutrition label. They're actually kilocalories. So we take 1,000 grams of water, which is a kilogram of water. And if we raise that temperature of that kilogram of water by 1 degree, that's 1 calorie. So let's say I take a hamburger and I put it under a beaker of water, 1 kilogram of water, and I light that hamburger on fire. All of the nutrients that are in that hamburger are going to be burnt up as energy, right? They're going to be digested by the flames, basically. And so as I digest that hamburger, I got a little temperature probe inside that jar of water, and the water is going to go up by, we're going to say 500 degrees. So it gets really freaking hot because all of that, energy from the hamburger is being transferred to the water, right? So it goes up by 500 degrees, which tells me there are about 500 calories in that hamburger. That's how we measure things. So we burnt that hamburger up very quickly. You and I break things up using our digestion chemistry, right? And we still release all the same amount of energy. So you put a hamburger and light it on fire and it goes up by 500 degrees. Great, that's 500 calories. You consume a hamburger, it gives you and I 500 calories worth of that energy. All that energy that was being released by the flames, it kind of just went into the atmosphere. It's heat and light, it got released. For us, it's also heat and light, but we capture that energy to do all the stuff that we do every day, right? We go back to yesterday, we talked about, we turned all of that 500 calories worth of energy into a whole bunch of ATP molecules. And all of our cells can break those ATP molecules apart, releasing tons and tons of energy and allowing us to do all of our work. So how do calories actually work? How much energy is going to be found in these nutrients? Well, if you got about 1 gram of carb in a food, there's going to be about 4 calories for every gram of carbohydrates. If you got 1 gram of protein, you're going to get another 4 calories for every gram of protein. And in a molecule of fat, which actually has the most energy, you'll get about 9 calories worth. So that's actually one of the ways that we can figure out how many proteins, fats, and carbs you need. If I had a client who wanted to be on a 2,500 calorie diet, right, and I wanted them to consume, let's say, 40% carbohydrates, I would take 2,500 calories and I would divide it by 40%. That'd be, or I'd multiply that by times 0.4. So there we go. That's 1,000 calories worth of carbohydrates. Now I know there are 4 calories in a gram of carbohydrates. So if I divide 1,000 by 4, I would tell them, hey, I want you to eat around 250 grams of carbohydrates per day. That'll give you 1,000 calories. That'll be 40% of our caloric goal. I know I did that a little quick, but that is what we're going to be learning in our nutrition class. And I just wanted to do it as a preview. So that is how we actually calculate out our clients' macros, right? Yep, Freddie, I think you'd be excited about that one. So let's go ahead and talk about what proteins, fats, and carbs are. Like I said, carbohydrates are your sugars and your starches, right? So they're big, complex chains of sugar molecules. We can't process carbohydrates directly because of what I talked about yesterday, but we can process the sugars. So the purpose of our digestive system is to take a big, long chain of complicated carbohydrates, snip it all up into individual sugars, and then get it into our bloodstream. Now, that might make it sound like you only want to consume sugars directly, but the problem with that is it actually spikes your blood sugar levels, and that causes a lot of problems. We will be talking about that later as well. So your macronutrients, you've got carbohydrates, which are complex chains of sugars, and you've got, my PowerPoint's all out of, my notes are all out of order. All right, I got to skip down here and I'll come back. You got our fats. Fats are complex chains of fatty acids. So there's a couple different versions of them, but the most common one that we talk about are triglycerides. Triglycerides are going to be what you're talking about when you're talking about your fats in your diet. So when you look at a nutrition label and you look at the fats on there, right, you'll see it's listed as either saturated or trans fats. And then there's actually a third category of unsaturated fats, which are more important. In a good nutrition label, you'll see all 4 of them, right? So we look here and we're going to see we've got 11 grams of fat. That's 2 grams saturated, 3 grams trans fat, 3.5 grams of unsaturated, and 3 grams of mono unsaturated. So those are the 4 categories of triglycerides. For the record, cholesterols are also fats, so that's its own little category. That's why it gets its own section here. And then there's also things like hormones and things like that even found in there as well. But for the most part, those are what your chains of fatty acids actually are. So ideally, we want to consume mostly unsaturated fats. Unsaturated fats are the healthy fats. And they're very, very important because they allow us to produce lots of energy. In fact, there's more energy, like I said, in 1 gram of fat. There's 9 calories. That's more than double the amount of energy found in protein or carbs. And so fatty acids can skip glycolysis. Remember yesterday we talked about starting in glycolysis and then moving into the Krebs cycle. They can go straight into the Krebs cycle. All they have to do is be oxidized a little bit. So with a little bit of help of extra water and a little bit of help of extra oxygen, you can turn fat directly into energy very, very, very easily. It's one of the reasons why we love having fat in our diet. I know low carb and low fat, both of those things are very popular forms of diets, but trust me, guys, fats and carbs are very, very good for you. We just need to make sure we're eating the right amounts of them. So fatty acids that can't be synthesized by the body are what we call your essential fatty acids. Those are your omega-3s and your omega-6s. Those are very, very small fatty acids that are very important for us, but we can't make them by the body. Most of the stuff that your body needs, your body can make. But with your essential fatty acids, you can't make those. So we have to get them from our diet. So we need to make sure that we do have a diet that's rich in omega-3s and rich in omega-6s. You're going to get those from those oils that we talked about earlier, your healthy fats. Olive oils, fish oils, and things like that, all very, 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 very healthy for you. Now we also get cholesterol when we're talking about fats. Cholesterol is going to be synthesized in order to make things like hormones. Guys, testosterone, very, very important. It's one of the reasons why you need to have cholesterol in your diet. Also helping make your cell membranes. That's one of the reasons we use cholesterol. Remember earlier we talked about those globules of fat. If I skip back enough, I'm sure I'd find it. But you know, if you look at a fat globule here, it looks something kind of like this. That outer membrane there is made by cholesterol. So cholesterol, I know we all talk about it being kind of a bad thing because it can be related to heart disease, but it's also very, very important for us because it's what allows us to make the membranes in all of our cells. Then we've also got proteins. I gotta skip back up here. Proteins, big complex chains of what we call amino acids. Amino acids look very similar to sugars, except that they've got a bunch of weird shapes. There are 20 of them, 20 different shapes of your amino acids, right? So that means that we have 20 different amino acids. Now, when you're consuming protein, you can consume it in 2 fashions, complete proteins and incomplete proteins. Complete proteins mean it's a protein that has all 20 of those amino acids. Now, it is possible to consume a protein that has very little or almost none of those amino acids, like plant matter, corn, and things like that. They don't have tryptophan or lysine. So because of that, they're an incomplete protein. Doesn't mean they're unhealthy. In fact, they're incredibly healthy. But it does mean that they are missing some of the things that allow you to make new you, to make more of you, right? You need to have all of your amino acids before you can make a protein. You have to have all 20 of them. You can't, if you had 19 amino acids, your body can't make a new protein. It's missing an ingredient. But here's the thing. Your body can always break down an amino acid, reassemble it, and make one of the ones that's missing. At least it can do that with most of them. It can't do it with all of them. That is one of the reasons why we have our essential amino acids and our non-essential ones. The non-essential ones, our body can make those. But the essential ones, our body can't. So this list right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And actually there's more than that. That's a weird list. Here we go. Yeah, that's still 9, actually. You get about really closer to 12 essential amino acids, right? And your body has to get those in your diet. If you don't get them in your diet, your body can't make them. Let's say you're missing one of the non-essential ones. Your body's like, you know what? That's fine. I can make that myself, right? By breaking down these other ones. So amino acids, you want to make sure you are getting complete proteins in your diet. Now, here's the thing. Complete proteins are only found in animal products, with the exception of like soy and quinoa and a few other things that are out there. For the most part, complete proteins are going to be found from animal sources, which makes sense because, again, I told you, you need all 20 amino acids in order to make a protein, including the essential ones. So that was true for the animal as well. So the animal's body assembled all 20, and that's why eating meat will give you a complete protein. Now, that is not me saying you have to be on a meat diet. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan out there, you know, that is actually totally fine as well. You can do that, no problem, right? You just have to make sure you are complementing incomplete proteins together. So if you are if you are eating incomplete proteins, you have to complement them. So beans are an incomplete protein. Rice is also an incomplete protein. But the ones that you're missing from beans and the ones that you're missing from rice complement each other and they fill in each other's gaps. So when you eat rice and beans together, you've got a complete protein. So that is what we'll talk about in our protein class later down the line. Next one we got our vitamins. Vitamins are organic compounds that are very important for metabolizing certain things. You've got your fat-soluble variety, and you've got your water-soluble variety. The fat-soluble stuff are your vitamins A, D, E, and K, and the water-soluble stuff is your B complex and your vitamin C. Lots of B vitamins, by the way, 1 through 12. You need to make sure that you are getting all of these. Vitamin A is really important for cholesterol. Vitamin D is really important for absorbing calcium. Basically, vitamins and minerals interact with each other in order to create certain processes in the body. Remember yesterday we talked about the Krebs cycle? That was thanks to your B vitamins, right? B vitamins really important for kicking off that metabolism, right? So lots of really good sources out there for vitamins A, D, and K. There's a working list right here that's not bad, but we'll get into that much more later. You can see there's another working list. There's the B vitamins, and then lastly, there's your vitamin C. It's a good list, but I'll do a much better job in the class. We have a day dedicated to vitamins and minerals in nutrition. So basically think of them as helping your body do certain physiologic processes. Minerals are actually inorganic, meaning that they're an important nutrient, but they are not actually part of like your body proper. Like they're not interacting with your body directly. They're sort of interacting with your body indirectly. So an organic compound is, consisting of carbon. These elements are their own metals. They're their own thing. So they actually become part of our body sort of temporarily, like your calcium, for instance. It becomes part of your skeletal system along with phosphorus, which is also part of your skeletal system, making calcium phosphate. That's how you get bones. And those things sort of live in our body, but they also get broken down and then can't be used anymore. So our body pees them out, and then we get more calcium and more phosphorus in our diet and add it back to our skeletal system. And it's kind of a continual process of breaking down and building up and breaking down and building up. Iron lives in your blood cells for a little while, but then eventually we lose that iron over time, right? So minerals, we're going to break these down into 2 major categories as well. We're going to have major minerals and trace minerals. The only difference here is that major minerals, you need more than 100 per day. Trace minerals, you need less than 100 milligrams per day. But here's some really good sources. Calcium, we know milk, that's a big one. Chlorine, yes, chlorine, by the way. Yeah, that's the stuff that's found in disinfectants. You do need it in your diet, but here's the thing. You're going to get it from water. It's in there naturally. Do not go out drinking chlorine like certain political figures may have said. Not a fan of that concept. Do not do that. But you're going to get plenty of chlorine from water in your diet and also salt. There's a lot of chlorine attached to salt. Magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, that is a huge one. Sodium, that's a really big one. Sulfur, believe it or not, the same thing found in matches. Yeah, that's a nutrient. Chromium, cobalt, copper, fluorine, iodine, iron, manganese, selenium, and zinc. All of those metals are actually nutrients that do interact with your body. All right, so that is pretty much everything. Now, as we get older, obviously this kind of slows down. This is just like an extra little fact at the end. I don't know why they put this in here, but as you get older, your digestive system does slow down. It's one of the reasons why it's so important to take care of it throughout your life. So yeah, those are some of the nutrients we're going to talk about in our actual nutrition course. We have an entire 8 days dedicated to understanding all of these nutrients and breaking them down, understanding how we can coach our clients with them, which is also very helpful. So we've got plenty of time to kind of get into all the nitty gritty, but hopefully today, with this very large, broad overview, you're going to have an understanding of how all this stuff kind of functions as we start moving into more of our metabolic talks later. So when we start getting into a little bit more talking about like metabolism and how it's operating, hopefully you've got some mental pictures of how all this stuff is working, right? Yesterday, we talked about metabolism in general. Today, we talked about catabolism. And we're going to sort of pivot into tomorrow. We're going to be working our way into the respiratory system. And that's going to be where we start to get the ingredients necessary to process all of these nutrients. Because here's the thing. All these nutrients are really good. We can't use them without oxygen. And that's what we're going to get into tomorrow. So digestion takes really big stuff, breaks it down into really small stuff. First, we ingest it, then we propel it to where it ever needs to go. We mechanically process it, we chemically process it, we absorb as many nutrients as possible, and we kick the rest of it out of the body, right? Your stomach does most of the chemical digestion. Your small intestine does most of the absorption. Your large intestine finishes out the absorption, gets the vitamins, minerals, and water. And then you eliminate it all out the back end. And that is a very broad overview of digestion and a preview into nutrition. Any burning questions you guys have before I let you all out of here?
Sir, no, sir.
Yeah, it's
No
a big
question, sir.
Yeah. Definitely one of
No,
my
I'm good.
slides. Cool.
I will see you later tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, it'll be helpful. All right, guys.
All right.
I'll let all y'all out of here. Hope you had a great day. If I can hang on to Eric, Panuka, Kelvin, and Andrea, I just want to show you guys how Canvas works. And everybody else, I can let you all out of here.